Cassius Clay was one of two sons born to what was considered a middle-class black family in Louisville, Kentucky. His father was a fairly loud, bombastic, sometimes bitter man, drank to excess. It was not a happy home.
In sports, he found a meaning and a discipline and a sense of belonging.
Inside a boxing ring, that was the one place where he could control his own environment. It was as though God was telling him, this is what you're supposed to do.
For young black men in their late teens or early 20s, growing up in the United States in the early 1960s, you were a citizen of the country, and yet everywhere you went, there were signs reading white and colored. Legal segregation of restaurants, restrooms, stores, hotels. Constant daily reminders that you were a second-class citizen.
Cassius Clay goes to the Olympics in Rome. He wins a gold medal, and he's very proud to be an American. Then he comes back to the United States, and despite having won the gold medal, there are still restaurants he can't go in. He's still called a nigger in some places. He's not happy with it. Then he signs with the Louisville Sponsoring Group, which is a group of wealthy white men in Kentucky. They hired a trainer, Angelo Dundee.
So they called me. They asked me how we would work with the kid over the phone. I said, very slow, I said, because the transition from amateur to pro takes time. They're like that, so 20 minutes later they call me, the kid's be down tomorrow. He wants to fight.
He came here a young man, wide-eyed, sparkling, smiling. He's in Miami. He never saw anything like Miami. He's with Angelo Dundee and everybody. He never saw anything like the Fifth Street Gym. That was an island of democracy in the middle of all this segregation.
Fifth Street Gym. Man, what a gym that was. Go up a flight of steps, rickety. Some fighters would get mad at something, bring a hold into the wall.
Cassius, how do you feel today?
Pretty good. How you doing?
I hear you met Don Juan today. How was he?
Yeah. He wasn't too friendly.
What do you have to say?
He didn't even shake my hand.
What are you going to do about that?
Now you must fall.
And everybody in the gym loved him. Loved him. Thought that was great. Everybody thought this is our guy. This guy's going to be the guy.
Well, Cassius, how do you rate yourself as a fighter?
Well, I wouldn't want to do too much bragging about it, but everybody that watches me fight or everybody that has witnessed one of my bouts, they say that I am the greatest that they've ever seen.
I got him a room at the Charles Hotel in Overtown.
Overtown is Miami's historic black community. It really was established in 1896 when the railroad came in and Miami was founded as a community. It was an absolute center of culture, education, social life. Anything you could get in Harlem, you could get in Overtown. It was just magnificent. Barbershops, restaurants, movie theaters, 5 or 6 of those. For many years, it was the very heart of black Miami. The Civil Rights Movement started in Miami much earlier than it did elsewhere. That was a lunch counter sit-in in Miami before the one in Greensboro that started the whole Civil Rights sit-in phenomena. So Miami was really a little bit ahead of the Civil Rights Movement.
Blacks had their own position, comfortable in themselves, and didn't pay attention to whites. And the whites did the same. The whites had their little Burdines and Jordan Marsh and don't come in here.
I took him shopping to one of the largest department stores in South Florida and in Miami, Burdines. There was some very nice shirts and they were on sale. And other people were trying them on. The salesman came over and said, "We don't allow blacks to try on clothes." I couldn't believe this. Here I am, supposedly in a more enlightened town. He's not trying on clothes in my store, and he isn't in any major department store in downtown Miami. At that point, Cassius, pulled me in the sleeve, and we went over and talked, and he said, "Look, I don't want to get in this kind of trouble. The police will come, and that's going to be bad for me." So he said, "Let's go to there's nice stores in the black section," so he showed me where they were, and we bought him some really nice clothes at the, and some neat shoes at the black store.
Racial segregation was not as severe as it was, say, in Atlanta or in New Orleans, but nevertheless, it still existed.
And the kid didn't have a car. A lot of times he would run across the causeway and come to the South Beach. One day the cops stopped him, big skinny kid running across the highway, helter-skelter. So I'm Angelo Dundee's fighter. And then they said, they called me up and said, I said, yeah, he is. It's the great fighter.
She hit him with a left uppercut. I thought it was beautiful.
Angelo was the perfect trainer for Cassius Clay because he let Cassius be Cassius in and out of the ring. Angelo understood immediately that Cassius did things all wrong from a technical point of view, but he could get away with them because of his speed and his reflexes.
Well, I'm sure any heavyweight that follows me in the ring for 6 or 7 rounds, he's mine after that, if he's still standing.
The newspaper guys at first, his first 6 fights, they thought he was too awkward. Pull back from punches, fast hand, don't move. They thought, too much. But I said, look, it'll smooth out.
One of the issues that the older sports writers had with him was his unorthodox style. He was leaning back and away from punches. Well, everybody knows that somebody just needs to step forward, you're off balance, and hit you.
He moves around so much that he really didn't get set, but he was usually moving so fast and concentrating on all the razzle-dazzle that he didn't show for quite a while that he could punch.
Angelo just tried to build on what Cassius Clay did naturally.
I made him feel he innovated everything, because you got to do that with star quality. So I'm just a flunky, I'm there showing them, do this, do that. But it worked. Come out of the ring one day, and I said, man, that jab of yours is really snapping that guy's neck back. You're getting it right in the small of his back. You're bending that knee perfect. Next day, he would do it.
That was a jab, that bip, bip, bip. He threw it like this. He didn't throw a jab like this. He flicked it. He called it snake licking. Bip, bip, and he moved. And all of a sudden, he stands still, and there went the right hand.
And he combined that velocity with the power of a heavyweight, and he created a whole new thing. We never saw a heavyweight fighter like that, and we have not since.
I mean, the first fights were like exhibitions that were so easy. Finish. I mean, he even took apart Archie Moore, who was a really clever fighter and hard to get out. He knocked him out.
But Archie Moore is going around popping off saying he's inventing a lip buttoner for me. See, I've earned a reputation as the Louisville Lip. Well, since he's going to invent a punch called the lip buttoner, and I'm the one who usually does the popping off, but he's starting, so I cut this from 8 rounds to 4 rounds. You know how great I am. I don't have to tell you about my strategy. Let my trainer tell you. Bodini, come here. Bodini, tell him, what are we going to do? You're going to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee. Rumble, young man, rumble. That's what we're going to do. You heard it. That's my trainer. He'll tell you.
We would rhyme around the barbershop, and he came in and he started listening to that, and he said, this is going to be my gimmick.
He will be mine in round 9, and if he makes me sore, I'll cut it to 4.
Thank you very much.
And if that don't do, we'll get him in 2. If he run, we'll get him in 1. And in your heart, you know I'm right.
He wasn't that great a talker till he met Gorgeous George in Las Vegas.
I saw a wrestler once named Gorgeous George, and the place was jam-packed with people. Cars was lined up for miles. They hated Gorgeous George. They wanted him beat, but they paid $100 for a ringside seat. So Gorgeous George walked out with his pretty silver hair, and he was walking so proud, and people was woo, throwing popcorn at him. He said, you bums. He was hollering at the fans. I don't care nothing about you.
And I can't lose. If I lose, I'll cut all my blonde locks in the ring.
Look at my beautiful blonde hair. If he mess up this hair, I'll kill him. I'll annihilate the bum.
But I can't lose. I'm the greatest.
So I got this from Gorgeous George. I said, this is a good idea. Look, he's getting rich. So I start talking. I am the greatest. I cannot be beat. I'm too pretty to be a fighter.
What he's doing is he's taking the American culture, what's in the air at the time, and he invents something called Cassius Clay, the greatest. It's a self-creation. That's a very American thing. And Cassius Clay Muhammad Ali, to me, is writ large one of those self-invented American characters.
Cassius Clay understood that ultimately we're just hungry for copy. And so if you give us copy, as long as you give us copy, you can pull our strings and we have to write about you. And Cassius Clay was able to frame the story. The narrative was his.
They came to that Fifth Street Gym and was like a magnet.
Yes, we parked right over here.
Everybody wanted to see this kid because he was something new, something bright. And Fifth Street Gym was the theater, it was the place.
I am the greatest.
The world was his stage, and wherever he went, that became his stage. It just so happened that Miami was the backdrop.
Everybody from New York, California, they wanted to come to Florida because of sun and fun.
We're on Miami Beach now. This is where all the rich people live.
All of commentators and sports writers, big columnists, radio, television people love to come to Miami, stay on Miami Beach.
A lot of Northerners were coming in. Jackie Gleason's nationally televised show was coming out of Miami Beach.
He brought Jackie Gleason around one night, Burt Lancaster. Oh, I can just go on and on naming the stars that came through.
When these great entertainers would finish their work on Miami Beach at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, they would come over to Overtown and they would go into the Harlem Square Club or some of the other clubs and then play until dawn, virtually for free.
And those places partied hard. It wasn't 2 seconds before the people in the ghetto said, leave him alone. He's going to be the heavyweight champion of the world. Don't offer him broads. Don't offer him booze. Don't give him a drink. Don't offer him pot. He doesn't smoke.
And the guy still lived in Overtown where he could have been a player, you know, and everything else. He abstained. He was something else, you know. A lot of people, you know, early in his career, they thought he was gay, for Christ's sake. There were so many girls around him, but he would train. He wouldn't mess around.
Boxing was a magnet for emotion and racial identity and the sense that this is one of ours, and people identified very heavily with boxers.
They just idolized him. Every move he took, there was crowds and crowds of kids.
He never did not have time for the kids. There were times in the community where he would set up on the front lawn movies, mostly fights, you know, of Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali. But the old reel-to-reel, the kind of ticker tape type stuff, and he'd have lawn chairs out and kids would sit in the grass. But we'd have, you know, 20, 30 community folk, you know, mostly kids, out watching fight films on a Friday night or Saturday night, and it was just really, really special.
Clay now, look at him. He's got his arms down. He's contemptuously treating Cooper. His arms are down by his hips.
I knew that Henry Cooper was dangerous. Clay wasn't taking this fight serious enough. Because Cooper could hit. That was one thing Henry Cooper could do. He'd a vicious left hook.
The bell has sounded, and he's up at about 3, Clay.
Oh, man, he got nailed. He got nailed.
About 2 seconds before the end of the round with the left hook.
Thank God the bell rang.
Too many, and he still doesn't know where it is. Half out, Clay.
Cooper should have won that fight.
And I believe that if Henry didn't cut so easy, he would have had a chance to be a champion.
He'd shown a weak chin. He'd been knocked down. He hadn't shown great punching power. And because he had played the role of the clown for so long with his poetry and his mugging and his gimmickry, people were inclined to not take Cassius Clay seriously as a fighter. In 1964, there was one heavyweight champion of the world. Liston was considered to be Godzilla. He was going to reign for 1,000 years.
And he was so good that nobody thought anybody in the world could ever, never, ever beat him. He was a badass guy, a bad guy.
Sonny Liston was an aggrieved, poor cast-off who learned to box in prison, an adoptee of the mob when the mob completely dominated boxing. And Sonny Liston was the nightmare in the imagination of the frightened white populace in the late 50s, early 60s.
Liston was a virtually invincible, just a dreadnought of a fighter, and he had this very forbidding, intimidating, utterly hostile manner about him. This guy was a headbreaker. That's how he went to prison. And in prison, he was a headbreaker. He was feared.
Sonny Liston, I watched him here in the gym a few months ago when he was here to fight Howard King. And he can hit a guy in the elbows and just about break his arm.
We used to go to Liston's fights. We used to challenge him.
Liston receives the congratulations due to Burns Cassius Clay, who's heard to say, Liston's not great, he'll fall in 8.
By the time Cassius Clay got to Sonny Liston, the general consensus was that Sonny Liston would annihilate him.
I really thought Liston was going to murder him.
Liston was the killer. Liston the destroyer.
Everybody's telling him he's crazy. Don't get with that guy. Wait till he gets older. I mean, this is going to kill you.
They figured my guy was going to get mangled.
You had to do something to defuse that. And to defuse that, he thought of all these high school stunts that he pulled on him, Sonny, which were demeaning, insulting.
When the guy went to camp and he harangued him with loudspeakers and stuff. Come out, you ugly bear, right in his home grounds.
I don't know whether that was what was necessary to maintain his confidence. He would just repeatedly talk about what he's going to do to him when he get him in that ring. Big old ugly bear.
And I think Liston got where this guy, hey, this guy's really off the totem pole.
Sonny didn't understand it. Sonny said, well, what's the matter with this kid? I mean, everybody shouldn't be scared to death of me. I mean, I should kill everybody. I mean, if I catch him in an alley, I'll send him home in a box.
I saw Sonny Liston a few days ago, Cassius. Ain't he ugly? He's too ugly to be the world's champ. The world's champ should be pretty like me.
This had to be somebody who was whistling past the graveyard, somebody who had to be scared, who was trying to, keep his courage up before he was destroyed.
This will be the biggest contest in the century. And if you like to lose your mind, be a fool and bet on Sonny.
Harry Benson, the great photographer, had set up a shot with the Beatles to take a picture with Cassius Clay, which they did not want to do.
John Lennon said, no, I know this guy, he's a big mouth, and he's going to get beaten. Get the other one who's going to beat him, Sonny Liston. We want to be with a champion.
And suddenly, the door opens to the dressing room. There is Cassius Clay. Hello, Beatles! And then they followed him out, like an 8th grade class trip. They followed him out into the gym. They lined up. He hit the first one. They all went down like dominoes.
They were always the funny ones, and they were funny. But he was better than they were. He was funnier.
The 60s at the time was not sort of an advertising concept. It was not a set of pop music hits. It was a period of near-revolutionary change in American life, in the American psyche, and in American relations between and among peoples and races and the rest.
In April and May of 1963, you have the single most important urban mobilization in the desegregation struggle of the South, and that's in Birmingham. King is jailed. Thousands are jailed. In September 1963, you have the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing and the murder of 4 little black girls. The month before, you have the March on Washington, D.C. 250,000 Americans, black and white, demonstrating, pressing the Kennedy administration to push Congress to adopt national civil rights legislation. In November '63, you have the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It was inescapable if you were a black American. Living in this country in 1963-64, not to have been profoundly moved and touched by these events. That was the context in which the Sonny Liston Cassius Clay fight occurred. occurred.
We declare our rank on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be respected as a human being, to be given the rights of a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence by any means necessary.
Malcolm X, once he got to know Cassius, he absolutely adored the young man and treated him like a younger brother. And the feeling was mutual.
The Muslims were this kind of powerful, mysterious force in America that were going to be able to mobilize all the blacks into a force that wouldn't go into the army and would challenge traditional authority. And they had this fiery leader, Malcolm X,
Well, they've been making it hot as hell for us.
who of course was not their leader. It was Elijah Muhammad.
A group that says that whites actually, far from being superior to us, are inferior to us. That black Americans should take pride in who they are. That kind of message would appeal to a young black man who felt deeply aggrieved at being mistreated and looked down upon.
I think what the Nation of Islam offered him was a kind of comfort and family, a sense of being smart that he had never found before.
The white man has told you time and again he didn't want you, crush you, stamp upon you, swing you up to a limb and lynch you.
The religion thing just melted right in his hands. Just what he wanted to hear, they told him. And then they signed him up, and boy, they had a pearl. Remember, up to that point, the black Muslims were very in a lot of disrepute. There were people that went to the penitentiary, came out of the penitentiary, and continued their criminal ways, only now in religion. There were still head breakers, but they were Muslims. They looked clean and nice and decent, and they wore suits. And they broke your head if you didn't see their way.
He had to keep this growing interest in the Nation of Islam a secret. The promoters, having learned about it before the fight, damn near called the fight off. They were terrified that if this got out, that he was tied up with Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam, that nobody would come to the fight, that his image would be even more tainted than it was, because a lot of people didn't like him. He bragged, he predicted these rounds. He was too, forgive me, uppity was the word of the cultural moment. So they kept this a secret.
It's the morning of February 25th, the day of the big fight. Now we'll see the craziest weigh-in in all boxing history.
Traditionally, the weigh-in before a major fight is kind of a brief ceremony. Well, it made absolute sense for Cassius Clay to take that to the extreme and turn the weigh-in into an enormous event itself.
Screaming, hollering, you'd think they're crazy. I mean, I'm down, we're the way. They kept right on going all the way through.
And Liston just thought he was crazy. And of course, in the prison yard, that's the one thing you have to watch out for. You have to watch out for a fight with a guy who's crazy. And it really spooked Sonny Liston.
It seemed so evident that he was out of control that the Miami Beach Boxing Commission physician said his blood pressure is dangerously elevated, his pulse is dangerously elevated, and that's not the way I think a fighter should be going into a big fight.
They thought they were going to cancel the fight. Forget about it, the weigh-in. He said my guy was scared to death.
Everybody in boxing said he's not going to last 2 rounds. This was a baby in there with a brute.
There was this sense, at least at my house and in my heart, that, this might be ugly because he didn't look like he could beat Sonny Liston.
First Liston fight, you got to remember, nobody gave my guy a chance. Nobody gave him a shot.
In the back of our minds, we hoped sincerely that he would do it. But there were little question marks because of the ferocity of this guy.
I understood perfectly that I should really enjoy this week as much as I could, because I'd never see Cassius Clay again.
Coming in there, Sonny gives you that, that great look, and there he comes up the ring stairs.
Lister walked in, he looked like a monster man.
The heavyweight
King Kong coming in, you know what I mean? That big a guy.
Collected, and
it's the first time we had really seen them together. There was a collective gasp. Cassius Clay was much bigger.
There's Liston with the stare, but he's got to stare up. He's not staring down because my guy's taller.
Shake hands. All set now. World heavyweight boxing title on the line. Cassius Clay on the move as we see, looking to get Sonny to lunge, carrying his left hand dangerously low.
They get in the ring together, and the most important attribute in Clay's arsenal comes to the fore, which is he's so fast. He's too fast for Liston.
Cassius, awkwardly fast. Good long left lead that might keep the champion a bit off balance.
Then he nailed Liston, a heck of a right hand.
Body, head, and right hand. The best punch in the fight so far.
A beautiful right hand. Great punch.
We thought Liston was going to just take him apart. But then we couldn't believe it.
The first round showed people, hey, this kid could fight.
And his jab hurt. You know, let's not make a mistake about something. A jab is a punch in the face. A jab hurts. A jab can break your nose. A jab can cut you around the eyes. To make it even worse, at the moment of impact, he'd twist his wrist so it had even more of a cutting impact upon your face.
Round number 3, Liston and Clay.
Cassius Clay lands a 1-2. And suddenly there are welts under Liston's eyes, that one of which is cut open and is starting to bleed.
Sonny has a big mouth below his left eye. He has a cut below the eye, and he's getting hit with all the punches in the book.
Liston was bleeding, which was kind of amazing.
Yeah, but Liston had his best round there. He came back a little bit because he started to get to my guy a little bit.
Hold it down! Cassius is a bit hurt.
To me, there seemed to be an air of inevitability hanging over it. It's just a question of time before Liston tags him.
And then Liston, of course, tries to cheat.
They're working on the cut below the left.
He told his corner to juice his gloves, to put some kind of astringent substance on his gloves. So in a last-ditch of effort, he could blind Clay and win.
Joe Polino's taking care of the cut. Joe was a great cut man. I think Joe used Monsell solution, which is ferric chloride. That burns the tissues, which is banned in boxing now because it's caustic.
If you look at the film, clinches with him all the time by putting his face right here. He puts his face, wears his face in, right, and he got that on him. That gets one little tiny spicule of that stuff in your eye, and you feel like you've got a iron in your eye.
He went back to the corner, and at that point, Angelo Dundee performed his most important service ever for Cassius Clay.
What do you think is going through this youngster's mind?
I told him to sit down. He told me to cut the gloves. So I said, wait, you can't cut the gloves, so you need your gloves. Sat him down. Let me see. So he's blinking. I started to put water in his eyes. I sponged him clean.
And Angelo says, listen, kid, this is for the world championship. Get your ass back out there.
And that's what I did. Would have been over. That's why I stood him up.
Getting ready for number 5.
Something wrong with Clay now. Something wrong with Clay.
He really couldn't see.
His eyes are bothering him. Ladies and gentlemen, we don't know exactly what happened. They're yelling from Cassius Clay's corner. Something got in his right eye. However, he's blinking badly. Sonny's going to try to pull it on.
All this work that he's done, all this training he's done, all is going to go out the window because this guy's going to knock him out because he can't see.
Yeah, I told him one thing, run. And he ran, thank God, for a half a round.
Cassius still having some problems with his eyes. He's blinking and he's bouncing away continually.
Anybody else working the corner would have quit. Anybody else would have let him quit. They wouldn't have sent him out there blind to meet and listen. Angel's the only one that had that faith in him to cure him and to send him out to fight. Because to send a guy to fight who can't see against one of the best fighters in the world takes a lot of guts on your part or stupidity on your part.
And Liston's getting dog tired because of the shots he's missing. And when those guys miss, cumbersome guys like that takes all the snap out of them. Well, see, now my kid's starting to come around now. He's starting to see what's going on. See, he's able to put his hand on top of his head, so his vision's coming back.
He completely stymied Sonny Liston with the gifts of speed, a jab, and courage and the ability to take a punch when he had that round where he couldn't see.
Liston was completely discouraged because he couldn't get him out of there when he couldn't see. So then he comes back in the next round and slaps him all over the place, and all of a sudden Liston's not throwing punches.
In round 6, we note that Sonny back-footed stance most of the time. Easy target. Easy.
And Liston ran out of gas. Emotionally, physically, he was out of gas.
Play with a variety of punches.
Liston had the courage of a bully, which is no courage at all in my book. He was great as long as he was beating the bejabbers out of somebody, but when somebody fought back, he wasn't quite that brave.
I'm in Liston's corner, and I hear his managers telling him, "You've got to go, Sonny. You're not going to be a bum all your life." This is where they were shouting him, "You've got to go." And I'm watching Clay, who is watching Sonny Liston. He knew that Liston wasn't going to come out.
The guy who notices is him, because he's standing, he's looking at the corner, and he knows the fight is over.
They might be stopping it.
Fight's over.
That might be all, ladies and gentlemen.
A terrific shock, I'd say, to 99% of the people following boxing.
And then, of course, Cassius Clay began, capering around the ring, telling the press, "Eat your words."
Clay is pointing toward those of us down in press row, and "I told you so. I tried to tell you, and you wouldn't listen. Now do you believe it? Now do you believe it?" He was just having a ball.
I must be the greatest. I told the world. I talk to God every day. If God's with me, can't nobody be against me. I shook up the world. I know God.
And he did it. He pulled it off. And nobody, even the big sports writers, they were in awe over what he had done.
I am the king of the world.
Hold it.
I'm pretty.
Hold it. You're not that pretty.
I'm a bad man. Wait. I shook up the world. I shook up the world.
And it was a brilliant performance by a young man who came into his own as a professional fighter that night.
It was really very hard to understand how the fight ended. A heavyweight champion of the world doesn't quit. You die in the ring. I mean, that's kind of the ethos of being the baddest man in America. When the heavyweight championship meant something, what did we not know? Was Sonny Liston throwing the fight?
If Sonny Liston had won that fight, that might have been the end for Cassius Clay. We might never have seen a Muhammad Ali, because by then it was common knowledge that he was a follower of Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm X was now a visible presence, and had Liston gotten by and escaped with a victory that night, it's quite possible that the powers that be never would have allowed Cassius Clay to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world again.
So he fights the fight, he wins, and then he gives a press conference a bit later, and he announces that I'm no longer Cassius Clay. In fact, I believe he said he was Cassius X. It was kind of placeholder for the moment until he figured out that he was going to be Muhammad Ali. He would no longer use what he called his slave name, and that he would appreciate it very much, thank you, if you would take this information on board and respect it. And of course, not everybody was prepared to do that.
Oh, I remember the reaction. Horror. Horror, how could he? Is he crazy? It'll ruin him. White America won't stand for it, which they didn't. The response to his announcement was one of disbelief.
After the victory, then Cassius goes to New York. He's escorted around Harlem by the notorious Malcolm X. And the media has a field day. Speculation is swirling in Harlem that Malcolm any day now is going to be out of the Nation of Islam.
Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls.
Malcolm X learns that Elijah Muhammad has impregnated several of his secretaries. And he felt deeply betrayed. He felt betrayed as a man, and he felt betrayed religiously and ethically and morally by the man he had given his whole heart and trust to. And so he questioned everything, including the whole creed of the Nation of Islam and the hypocrisy of it. And there were 2 men who, above all others, he wanted to pull out of the Nation of Islam with him. One was Louis X, who was the minister in Boston, today known as Louis Farrakhan. But the second person he wanted was Cassius Clay. It's precisely at that moment that Elijah Muhammad astutely diffuses the situation by bestowing upon Cassius X an original name.
This is a gift, our leading teacher, for waking all of us up because we were in a bad state of condition before we heard him.
Malcolm had been for a decade the most prominent minister in the Nation of Islam, and yet Cassius, well before Malcolm X, who deserved the honor, acquires the name Muhammad Ali. This is checkmate, high stakes. 2 days later, Malcolm walks out of the Nation of Islam. I think he was shocked that Clay didn't go with him.
Ali, over time, began to understand that he was big, that he was important, that he had an impact on people. The first time that really hit home was probably when he went to Africa after winning the heavyweight championship. What he found was he would go someplace and people would line the roads. People would come out of the jungle just to get a glimpse at him. And for the first time, he understood that his fame wasn't confined to Louisville or Miami Beach or the United States. He represented something. He wasn't sure what, but he knew he represented something to people outside of America.
The idea of Muhammad Ali traveling to Africa had actually been first posed and presented by Malcolm X. So it must have been galling to Malcolm to stand outside the hotel, the Ambassador Hotel in Accra, and encounter Muhammad Ali, who snubs him when they had once, only several months before, embraced as brothers. Malcolm is left vulnerable and alone. And his assassination takes place on February the 21st, 1965.
Malcolm X and anybody else who attacks or talks about attacking Elijah Muhammad will die. No man can oppose the message of Almighty God verbally or physically and get away with it.
When I went to visit him, as journalists do, he took out from his briefcase a picture of him and Malcolm X. He made it very clear that he carries this around as a kind of talisman of a terrible error he made in his life, which was at the instructions of the Nation of Islam to push Malcolm X away. And so to his friend and his mentor, he behaved terribly, and he regretted it all his life.
The heavyweight champion of the world, Muhammad Ali.
We thought that Liston would go the second time out.
For him to even think about doing it again was like, jeez, I mean, you got by once, don't try to do this again.
Says a prayer in his corner. Clay takes the lead at the start.
Boom, boom, hit him with a 1-2, the first 2 punches. That was a thing we planned ahead too. To hit him with a couple of good shots early on, make him remember the other fight.
I'm basically putting a camera up, and all of a sudden Liston is down. I never saw a punch.
The shot he hit him with, believe me, was a perfect shot. Right hand over the top, boom, he crumbles. Liston never saw the punch. That's the punch that gets you out of there, the punch you don't see.
There was still talk that the first fight was thrown. You know, I mean, it's there was more talk in the second fight that was thrown too.
I don't think that his performance in the two Liston fights convinced anybody at that time that he had really beaten Liston and that he was on his way to becoming arguably the greatest heavyweight of all times. I mean, that would evolve later.
By 1966, more than half of all African Americans opposed the war in Vietnam. Blacks were disproportionately dying in Vietnam.
I swung over to do a feature story on Ali, who was preparing for a fight. He had this little rented bungalow in Miami, and he is enraged. He had just gotten a call from an Associated Press reporter to get his reaction to the fact that his Louisville Draft Board had changed his classification to 1A, which meant that, you know, theoretically he could be drafted. And he was very angry, and his first reaction was, why me?
Why me, the heavyweight champ of the world, and ranking me as 1A without testing me in no way? I just can't understand it, and I'm trying to figure it out. Why is this me?
There were all these interviews about how do you feel about this, and do you know where Vietnam is? Sure, I knew where Vietnam is. Well, I barely knew where Vietnam was. Who knew where Vietnam was? So, champ, so how do you feel about going over to Vietnam and killing some Viet Cong? I got nothing against them Viet Cong. And then there was that kind of wonderful moment of silence where everybody except me understood that we got the lead, we got the headline.
That was a flashpoint, really. I mean, everything that Ali had done before was as nothing compared with his refusal to be inducted.
Many in the black community, once again, were confused in terms of why, put this on yourself. You're heading down a path of self-destruction.
When all this stuff came up and he didn't want to go to Vietnam, I said, look, there's a reason. This kid's sincere. This is his principle. It's him. He's true. He's honest.
Cassius Clay, or as he prefers to be called, Muhammad Ali, reports to an Army induction center in Houston, Texas. However, he says he will refuse on religious grounds to take the Army oath, an act that could cost him a $10,000 fine or a 5-year prison sentence or both.
Cassius Clay left the induction center to the cheers of supporters chanting, "If he don't go, we don't go."
Hell no, we won't go. Hell no, we won't go.
Suddenly, it didn't seem so craven to be afraid to go into the Army and fight this war. Mr. Man, the heavyweight champion of the world, the baddest man on the planet, he was against this war too.
Why should me and other so-called Negroes go 10,000 miles away from home here in America to drop bombs and bullets on other innocent brown people who's never bothered us? And I will say directly, no, I will not go.
He didn't want to be a black man sent by white men to kill brown men.
Blacks have always admired other blacks who would stand up to the government. There have been precious few of us who've done it. So someone who does that attracts a great deal of admiration.
The reaction was instantaneous, and it was devastating because boxing commissions are basically, lodged in states and cities, are political patronage appointments. So it was, not long after that he began to lose sanctions for fights.
He had basically crossed the Rubicon. Didn't take long for them to strip him of his title.
He gave up a boxing career based on religious beliefs and stood by that.
I would like to say that I did not lose a thing up until this very moment. I haven't lost one thing. I have gained a lot. Number one, I have gained a peace of mind. I have gained a peace of heart. I now know that I'm in content with Almighty God Himself, whose proper name is Allah.
Cassius had receded, and the man who became Muhammad Ali had gone a long distance toward really identifying himself with that name and with what that meant. It's that Ali who transcended sport that truly became a historic figure.
He really didn't understand how important he was. He didn't know that people like Nelson Mandela were listening to his fights on the radio in their jail cell in South Africa. He didn't understand that they were little black kids growing up in the country whose parents had thought it was better to be white than black. But because Muhammad Ali was saying black is beautiful, they were just as happy being black as anybody else was being white.
We don't have figures like that that come along every day.
I told you I was going to come back one day and get you, didn't I? I always told you I was coming back.
When he beat George Foreman to reclaim the heavyweight championship of the world was a glorious, glorious time for him, and that's the victory in the ring that meant the most to him. But one of the most exciting, happiest periods of Ali's life was that period in Miami. He was young, he was handsome, he was fast, he couldn't possibly be beat. He was at his greatest, and that's the Ali that a lot of people fell in love with.
It is fun to think that you were a part of something so unusual in the sport. Nobody ever did what Ali did in boxing. Nobody.
I think it's wonderful what he created. And you're not only in the boxing world, as he being. People are really turned on what this kid did. And I'm not amazed because I always knew there was such greatness involved with this kid. More than the people could see. He's just a great human being, the most recognizable face in our universe. Let's face it.
They're throwing the chair, but I don't think so. All right, Pellison. All right, Cash. Thank you. Thank you. Cassius Clay, the heavyweight champion. Let's get our champion.
Next this afternoon, the real story of Clint Eastwood's movie Invictus, how Nelson Mandela united the people and nation of South Africa around the 1995 Rugby World Cup. Stay with history for Playing the Enemy.